Good Tuesday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for March the 28th. Today we are reading together in Leviticus chapter 17. And before I forget, had a birthday I missed yesterday. I believe it was Miss Sherry's birthday. Happy birthday, Miss Sherry, yesterday. I think today is Seth's birthday. So happy birthday to Sherry and Seth. Hope y'all have had a great start to your week. I'm glad that you're along with me today as we read together from Leviticus chapter 17, which is beginning what is known as the Holiness Code section. The instructions for holiness, again, often known as the Holiness Code, Leviticus 17 through 26, these final 10 chapters of the book of Leviticus, which Leviticus is the handbook basically for the priest to teach them and to instruct them how to carry out their duties for Yahweh as the mediators between him and his people. Here in this chapter, it seems as if worship is being centralized, that the worship needs to be taking place around the tabernacle, and that is to prevent some of the issues that I'm not certain that these were issues that were already taking place. Excuse me, or if these were issues that Yahweh was getting out in front of. Whichever it is, the warning is you don't need to be offering animals outside of the tabernacle, because that can get you in trouble if you do. So let's think about that from here in Leviticus chapter 17. This chapter, all about blood and issues concerning blood. So if you are a bit squeamish, I'm not going to tell you to not watch today, but do what I told you last time. Set it on 2x speed, that at least you can listen through quickly and be on your way for today. Leviticus chapter 17 and verse number 1, Yahweh spoke to Moses, "Speak to Aaron, his sons, and all the Israelites, and tell them, this is what Yahweh has commanded. Anyone from the house of Israel who slaughters an ox, sheep, or goat in the camp, or slaughters it outside the camp, instead of bringing it to the entrance to the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to Yahweh before his tabernacle, that person will be considered guilty. He has shed blood and is to be cut off from his people. This is so the Israelites will bring to Yahweh the sacrifices they have been offering in the open country." So I guess it seems that they have been offering those in other places. So that's answering the question I had earlier. "They are to bring them to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting and offer them as fellowship sacrifices to Yahweh. The priest will then splatter the blood on Yahweh's altar at the entrance to the tent of meeting and burn the fat as pleasing aroma to Yahweh. They must no longer offer their sacrifices to goat demons that they have prostituted themselves with. This will be a permanent statute for them throughout their generations. Say to them, anyone from the house of Israel or from the aliens who reside among them who offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice, but does not bring it to the entrance to the tent of meeting to sacrifice it to Yahweh, that person is to be cut off from his people." Verse number 10 of Leviticus chapter 17, "Anyone from the house of Israel or from the aliens who reside among them who eats any blood, I will turn against that person who eats blood and cut him off from his people. For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have appointed it to you to make atonement on the altar for you, or for your lives, since it is the lifeblood that makes atonement. Therefore I say to the Israelites, none of you and no alien who resides among you may eat blood. Any Israelite or alien residing among them who hunts down a wild animal or bird that may be eaten must drain its blood and cover it with dirt, since the life of every creature is in its blood. I have told the Israelites, you are not to eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood. Whoever eats it must be cut off. Every person, whether the native or the resident alien, who eats an animal that died of natural death or was mauled by wild beasts, is to wash his clothes and bathe with water, and he will remain unclean until evening. Then he will be clean. But if he does not wash his clothes and bathe himself, he will bear his iniquity." And that is Leviticus chapter 17. So this chapter, excuse me, again, focusing on blood, seems to be centralizing the worship practices of Israel. This particular chapter, I think, really pertains itself to the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. Why? Because the issue here seems to be sacrificing to other gods. I mean, in verse number 7, it talks about sacrificing. They must no longer offer their sacrifices to the goat demons. So it's not just a hypothetical, it seems. seems as if there is a demon that they were offering sacrifices to, which is interesting. They talk about a goat demon, since we have in the previous chapter, chapter 16, the issue of a goat, and one of the Jewish traditions there being that the word Azazel is actually a name for a demon who was associated with goats. So that may or may not be a connection, but just interesting for that to be something that is seen here within this chapter. But the issue here, again, concerning blood, is that blood was only proper for use in worship to Yahweh. It was only used properly when that use was worship to Yahweh. It was not to be offered to anybody else. It was God's alone. The reason for that, we see beginning in verse number 10, is it's a big no-no, not only to sacrifice that blood to another god or to another deity or pagan god, however you want to refer to that, but it's also a big no-no to eat any of the blood, because of verse 11. Verse 11 should be a text, hopefully, that we're very familiar with. I think this would be really a foundational verse for the entire scriptures, for the entire Bible, because blood plays such a key role. Here in Leviticus 17, verse 11, for the life of the creature is in the blood, and I have appointed it to you to make atonement on the altar for your lives, since it is the lifeblood that makes atonement. So God being the author of life, has a right to have that which is the source of life for us. Maybe we've all heard stories. I want to say there's a story of a president that either did die or was on the verge of dying, because they did a whole bloodletting thing on him. Obviously, they were not as familiar with scripture as they should have been, knowing that if you take blood out of somebody, they're going to die. That's how God created us. Our blood, and just blood in general, is a very, very special commodity, because God has sanctified blood as being the life source. Blood equals life. It is something that is to be sanctified, and it is something that should be treated as such. It's not something that you just mess around with. Now, one of the issues that we have with this text, though, is the fact that here, especially verse number 3, anyone from the house of Israel who slaughters an ox, sheep, or goat in the camp, or slaughters outside the camp, it gives a prohibition against that. And some people, especially those who would just read very surface level of scripture and try to find these supposed contradictions in scripture, might turn to Deuteronomy chapter 12, where it talks about you can slaughter animals for consumption. So we need to recognize the varying context. In Deuteronomy 12, it's about eating food, that you can eat this food, you can slaughter these animals for food. Here, the slaughtering is in reference to worship and to sacrifices. You do not offer animals of sacrifice to anyone else, anything else, but Yahweh alone. He is a jealous God. And if you do this, then you will be cut off from the people. And this Hebrew word to be cut off is the Hebrew word karat. And it could be understood in a couple ways. Does this mean cut off as in exiled, or does this mean cut off as in given the death penalty? Some see this as being both, that it was the people who were to exile the offender, and then they trusted that Yahweh would take care of the rest after the person has been cut off from the community. But it just goes to show just how serious of an issue this is. This issue concerning blood, and how they need to make sure that they were handling it carefully and not being lackadaisical, and certainly not going so far as to use it in sacrifices to other gods, deities, pagans, and such. Verse 13 gets into the issue of hunters, and talks about whenever you kill, a wild animal or bird that may be eaten, you must drain its blood and cover it with dirt. That's kind of a weird thing. Why must they cover it with dirt? Well, one of the reasons, the background behind this, is probably to avoid pagan practices such as divination. Blood was used in those certain practices, and just cover up the blood. That way it cannot be used. That way you don't even have to worry about being tempted by that or have any issue with that whatsoever. And then the last two verses talk about anyone who comes across a dead animal. If they take it, basically they run across some roadkill, you might say, here in East Tennessee, and they take it home, they eat it. They can do that, but they just need to make sure that they bathe themselves in the clothes. They're unclean until evening. the ritual uncleanness that we've been talking about over the past few days. And he'll be fine after that. He'll be clean after that. But if he does not wash his clothes and bathe himself, he will bear his iniquity. He will have broken this commandment that we have here, within this text. So that's the issue of blood. Here's pretty simple. Don't sacrifice it to anyone except Yahweh. Don't eat it. It belongs to Yahweh and is given for atonement. It was given for atonement. It was something that was given in your place. God is the author of life. He's the one who controls life. When you sin, you deserve death, but he allows you to offer the sacrifice instead. So that blood is what is covering you. Therefore, you need to respect and give it back to God as being the one to whom it belongs. Whenever you kill an animal, don't use its blood for divination. If you come across an animal that's been killed and you end up eating it, make sure that you take care of the ceremonial cleanliness rules. You're unclean for the rest of the day. Don't be around people. Go back to chapter 14 or 15, I believe it was, that talked about uncleanness of various sorts. Excuse me. Just make sure you take care of all of those things. So chapter 15 here, finish off by thinking about this. One writer, Wenham, says that chapter 1 through 16, these are the regulations for public life and worship. And then he says in chapters 18 through 25, these are regulations for private and personal affairs. Chapter 17 then serves as the hinge that moves from one part of this book of Leviticus to the other. So from now on, as we're making our way through this book, we're going to see a lot of issues concerning individuals and various things that they could get involved in, that they don't need to get involved in. And again, focusing especially on being holy before Yahweh, being set apart from Yahweh, not being like the pagans that they're going to be among, but living as the distinct people of Yahweh. That begins with blood, how they use it, that they're not to offer it to pagans, that they are not to eat it, that they're not to practice sorcery or divination with it. They need to recognize the sanctity of it. And if they come across somebody with it, know that you're going to be, or come across an animal that has been killed, you're unclean until evening. Make sure you follow these rules and you'll be clean following that. So dealing with blood, a very big issue. And certainly as you move into the New Testament, that's a big issue as well, from many different perspectives, whether it be the blood of Christ and what it does for us, or whether it be in the first century, the issues between Jews and Gentiles and their regulations concerning blood. You can read more about that in Acts chapter 15. I appreciate you tuning in for this reading, though, on this Tuesday. Hope that you've had a great Monday and that your Tuesday is off to a great start. Looking forward to reading with you again tomorrow as we read together from Leviticus chapter 18, which details prohibited pagan practices. Prohibited pagan practices. I appreciate the alliteration given by the CSB writers here in Leviticus 18. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. Hope to see you then. Take care and God bless.